All right, I think we have the majority of attendees here. There'll probably be a few people that come in a little bit late, but I think with that, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone. Again, this is Dynamics 365 Business Central for the GP user, sponsored by ACE Microtechnology. My name is Mark Munson. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for ACE. I'm going to be starting off with a couple slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to our ERP Practice Director, Chris Eiler, to actually get into the presentation. So with that, let me thank everybody for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. And let me start with a few slides to set the scenario, and then I'll turn it over to Chris. So let's start with a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we have everybody on mute at this point, just so that we kind of minimize any kind of background noise. At the end of the session, we'll unmute all the participants if there's any kind of follow-on questions. If you have questions during the presentation, there is a section within the GoToWebinar that you can enter your questions, and we will address them either during the presentation or at the end of the presentation. If you're joining and you have others in your organization that would like to see this and unfortunately couldn't make it today, we will be recording the session. So a link will be sent out to you at sometime probably later this afternoon with the session recording that you can review again should you need to, or share with any of your coworkers. So with that, let's go ahead and get started, and let's talk a little bit about the background of what brought us here today. And the background is Microsoft's put a pretty interesting offer in place. Since you are a long time committed Dynamics GP client of ACE and of Microsoft, Microsoft's putting some options out there to kind of reward you for that commitment. So traditionally, in the GP world, on an annual basis, you would get an invoice from ACE, and that invoice was going to be for your annual enhancement plan. And ACE would in turn take that payment, forward it on to Microsoft, and that annual enhancement plan provided you a lot of benefits, but one of the primary ones was the ability to have access to new versions as they were released. So if you're on 2016, you'd have access to 2018, or now the fall 2019 release, or even the October 2020 release. Those were always there and available to you, so that when it came time to upgrade, or there was a desire to upgrade, you had that code available to you. What Microsoft has now done is said, okay, well, instead of allocating that just for GP, we're going to give you, kind of almost like a dual rights scenario, where we can apply that towards what's called CSP, Cloud Service Provider Solutions, which is what Dynamics 365 Business Central falls under, that licensing model. And so it gives you, as the GP user, an option. And that's quite simply it. I mean, the option is that you can stay on GP, or the option is, if you decide to pay this way, it gives you an option to move to Business Central and move to Microsoft's newest and greatest cloud-based solution. So all it is really an option, and giving you some of that flexibility to decide what you want to do, and that option can be exercised over a certain period of time. So it's what's driving a lot of this conversation of, gee, should we stay on GP? Should we go to Business Central? Should we think about it? And we're just telling you, we're trying to communicate to our clients that there's an option that exists, and a decision that has to be made before your renewal as to which direction you want to go. So that's a little bit of the background of why we're here today. Let me tell you a few other things that are benefits of this option. One, no longer do you have to pay that whole lump sum all at once. So let's just say, for easy math, your annual renewal was $12,000, and you had to pay that annual renewal in November for $12,000. Well, in November, you wrote a check for $12,000. Under this new option, you're able to take that $12,000 and really pay it over a 12-month period. So no longer do you pay $12,000 in November, now you pay $1,000 November, $1,000 December, and so on over that 12-month period. So it allows you to kind of spread that payment out and reduce kind of the a big CapEx expenditure at one month in the year. Secondly, Microsoft, because you are a client, and a client that Microsoft appreciates, ACE appreciates, they're providing some significant discounts. So you are able for that $12,000 to get the same amount, if not more, Business Central users. And when you do the math on that, it really comes in at a very, very reduced rate. I mean, we're looking at about a 60% discount is what we're seeing. It also is very, very friendly towards matching up licensing. As some of you may know, licensing for GP is concurrent licensing. So you may have 10 licenses, but you may have 15 people with access to the system and have credentials to the system. Now, the 11th person can't log in if the first 10 licenses are being consumed. Somebody has to log out, but they still can log in if once somebody logs out. In the cloud world, concurrent licensing does not exist. It's actually named licensing. So you would need 15 licenses for all 15 people. And so Microsoft is saying, okay, we understand that, and we understand we can't just give you 10 Business Central licenses and call it the same or call it the equivalent. It really needs to be 15 licenses, and so they're going to give you those 15 licenses for that same cost. As I mentioned before, dual use rights. It does give you the ability to continue to run GP for as long as you want to, and then make a migration to Business Central at some point in the future. That point in the future, though, once you make this commitment, is 3 years from your renewal date. So by moving to this new CSP renewal process, you're getting the payment spread out over a 12-month period, but you're also committing to moving to Business Central within a 3-year period. And you can do that now, or you can do that in 2.5, 3 years. It's up to you. It's there and available for you when you're ready. Now, a lot of people ask, what happens after 3 years if we don't migrate to Business Central? Great question, and the answer is you just revert back. As currently stated by Microsoft, you just revert back to your normal GP renewal at that point in time. And then the last point I wanted to make is that by doing this, you're not sacrificing any of the benefits of your current enhancement plan. Those still stay in place. So all the benefits associated with your existing renewals of GP are still in place during this transition period. So those are some of the benefits that are associated with this new option that Microsoft has provided. And we've been talking to clients one by one as to whether this is appropriate for them or not. For some clients, it's very appropriate. For other clients, not so much, and especially not now. And so the reason it's not now for a lot of our clients is that if you have third-party solutions, so what we're looking at is what's the viability of you making a transition? Well, the first thing we look at is the functionality in the core system. And, does it map from GP to Business Central and meet the common and core needs of the organization? In most cases, the answer to that is yes. BC is extremely robust, and you're going to see that from Chris here in a second. It can handle most of your core accounting needs. The second question is ISVs. Do we have third-party ISVs that are business critical to us? And in some situations, that's not the case. In others, it is. And those ISVs have not yet moved and or migrated their solution to Business Central. So we are forced to sort of wait. Either wait for them to do that or look at other ISV solutions that have similar functionality that are compliant with Business Central. So that's another big decision point is, do the numbers make sense from a math standpoint? Yes. Okay. Does the core functionality meet our needs? Yes. Do the ISVs support what we're trying to do and the additional functionality we need? If the answer to that is yes, then the last question is, well, how usable is it? What's the experience like? How different is it from GP? And so that's what we're going to get into today. That's what we're going to focus on today and really try to show you BC from the vantage point of a GP user. Presenting today is Chris Zeiler. Chris is a long-standing GP user. He's been in the GP space for a good 15, 20 years. He's taken the plunge into the BC space over the last 3 years. So there's really no one better positioned to kind of walk us through Business Central and say, okay, in GP, you did it this way. In Business Central, you do it that way. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to kind of compare and contrast for us. Again, questions in the question box, and then we'll open it up to questions. We'll try to save 5 minutes at the end for questions for the entire group. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Chris. Chris, if you want to go ahead and take presentation. I'll change the presenter here, and you should have control of the screen, sir.
All right. Good morning, everybody. As Mark said, my name's Chris Zeiler. I see a lot of familiar names on the attendee list. I've been looking forward to this session for a number of weeks now. As Mark said, today is really about users, GP users that want to get a look at Business Central. And today, Mark has kind of gotten the nuts and bolts in terms of licensing and so forth out of the way. Let me just flip this so we get this on the right side. So today, really what I'm going to show you is the product. What does Business Central look like for the end user? What are some of the differences from Dynamics GP? And what are some of the things you can expect in terms of changes in process and so forth if you decide to take a closer look at it? I'm going to go through a crash course on this. I promise this is my only PowerPoint slide. I just kind of like to tell you what I'm going to tell you before I tell you it. So, you know, really the very first item that we're going to go through is system accessibility. So we're going to talk about how we access the Business Central environment. It's very different than Dynamics GP. We'll then go through some general navigation, so you get an understanding of how to navigate the product and how it's similar and dissimilar in some ways from GP. And then we're going to go into some page overviews. So what I mean by pages is Business Central is a web application. So it is web pages that are serving up all of the functionality and the content. So there are some different types of pages that actually 4 in total that really show all of the data in Business Central. So in demos that I do for the product, I feel that if I show you what those pages look like, you can kind of draw conclusions and get a really good immersive view of what the Business Central experience is. We'll go through some general journals, which is just a general journal entry like it is in Dynamics GP. We'll talk about banking and cash management. And we'll go through some transactions in the payables module and so forth. So, and I'm going to try to save enough time at the end for some questions. I'm sure there's going to be some, so I'm hoping we can get some good Q&A at the end of the session. So with that being said, I'm going to jump out of here, and I am going to pull up Office 365. So the Office 365 homepage, for those of you that are using Office 365, is really office.com. That's kind of the hub for all of your productivity apps in Office. And if you look over here on the left, you can see that this is my login. You can see my name and my picture up here on the right. This is my ACE Microtech login. So I'm going to actually be demoing on our demo site that is underneath our Office 365 subscription and tenant. That is basically where Business Central resides. So you can see, I can see Word, Excel, Outlook, and so forth. And I even have a number of my files that I've utilized over the past several days that you can see up here as well. But what's really nice is Business Central plugs directly into this experience with the rest of my apps. So I can see I have this Dynamics 365 icon down here in the bottom left. When I click on that, it's going to take me to my D365 homepage, and I'm going to see all of my Business Central environments. Now, we only have 2. We have our Business Central production, and then we have a Business Central sandbox. So for those of you in the Dynamics GP world, there's a lot of different ways to do a sandbox. Sometimes we call it a test company. Sometimes we set up a whole new server, maybe a subnet on our LAN so that we can separate it out from all of the other areas of our local network. What's nice in Business Central is I have my production, and then I can have up to 3 sandboxes. So, and it's no additional licensing cost to log into the sandbox or log into production. And what else is nice is these are just web links. So I can have these in my favorites up in my web browser of choice, whether that's Google, Chrome, you name it. But before we jump into Business Central, I want to start where a lot of people start and end their day, and that's in Outlook. And I'm going to kind of play the role of an accounts payable clerk. And for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to utilize the web client for Outlook. What I'm going to show you is 100% available in the desktop client for Outlook as well. So really what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this demo folder, and I've got a few emails in here from some of my vendors that I manage. And the first one is from Aaron Bach. I'm sure some of you know Aaron. He's at Ace Microtech. He's done a number of these lunch and learns for us before. But what I want to call your attention to is over here on the right, you can see this Business Central pane pops out. One of the key differences between Business Central and Dynamics GP is contact management. It has a very good contact management subsystem for customers and vendors. So if I'm looking at my email here and I see an email from Aaron, I can see that he's not set up as a contact in Business Central, and I can quickly set him up if he's a new employee of one of my vendors. So if I look over here, I can go ahead and add Aaron Bach as a contact, and it's gonna pull his name from his email. This is a person, not a company, and I'm able to associate him with a company from my vendor list from within Business Central. So I'm just going to put Aaron with Services Electronics Limited here. And I'll go ahead and click OK. And we're going to circle back to this because it's really important, and we'll show Aaron inside Business Central going forward in the demo. But you can see right when I associate him with that vendor contact, now without even logging into Business Central, I have what's called the statistics fact box over here on the right side. And since I've associated him with Service Electronics Limited, I can see the balance. I can see how many outstanding purchase orders are open for that vendor. I can see how many outstanding invoices are open but haven't been processed. I can even take a look at the last payment date where we sent a payment to this vendor. So you can probably think if you're a payables clerk or a purchasing agent, probably 75% of the questions you get answered with an email can be answered by just looking at this vendor statistics and responding to an email directly from here. What else is nice is just like in GP, and if you've ever been in a GP training with me, I always say blue means show me more. I can click on the blue text here for balance, and I can open up a list of all of the open invoices for this vendor. And if I'm in a large list like this, I can break this out into a separate window where I can open this up and see the full content view just in Outlook right here. So I can see for Services Electronics Limited, I have 4 invoices that are overdue or past their due date. That's why they're red. And I've got 1 invoice that's not. And if you're looking at the due date, this is a lot like Fabricam. If you know the GP sample company, you know, the dates are kind of fixed, so the dates don't change, and we're not on October 28th. So this gives me a great deal of flexibility in terms of how I can get at the information. And once again, you know, blue means more. I can drill in and I can see these actual invoices if I want to, with the headers and the lines, and go directly into them to see the information. Let me just make sure I show you this. So it's not clicking up for me here. I'll come back to that. I'll show you in a different view here in just a moment. So over here on the right, I've got those invoices that I showed. Another thing that's really nice is down here on the last payment. So if I click on last payment date, I can see all of the payments that have been issued to this vendor by date. And if I need to zoom in and take a closer look at them, I certainly can as well. So I'm going to jump down off of Aaron, and I'm going to look at another invoice here. I've got a request to please remit invoice payment for invoice 107876. And if you see that the record is highlighted like this in red, it's already looked into the system, and it's going to try to find an invoice that matches that number. But if you look over here on the right, the email address that this came from, which is a Gmail account, just a dummy Gmail account that I set up, it's actually associated with multiple vendors in multiple companies. You can see it's in Coolwood Technologies and Johnson Cleaning Services in both the Kronos and Kronos Holdings Company. So I can actually pick which one this is for. So I can see this is Coolwood Technologies. This is Chris Seiler, he's a great guy. I can click in here and I can open up Johnson Cleaning Services and I can see all the information related to Johnson Cleaning Services. Now what's really nice is instead of this being just a inquiry tool, I can also enter transactions directly from here without even going into Business Central. So I have this plus button up here at the top, and because this contact is associated with a vendor, I'm going to see vendor documents that I can enter directly from Outlook. So I can create a purchase invoice. And I can expand the window here so that I have a little more real estate and you guys can see a little bit better. So notice all my information in the header up here under General comes from what is traditionally my vendor card from Dynamics GP. So I can go ahead and put my my invoice number here. This is like the document number in GP. I'll just say demo 4567. I'm going to charge this to an account. I believe I have 61,500 as miscellaneous expense. I'll just say I have a $999 invoice. That'll be easy for us to find. Okay, so I've gone ahead and entered the header information directly in Outlook, expensed it to a GL account line. I can make changes to payment terms and all sorts of stuff that's on the purchasing invoice. But what else is really important is if I have any workflow where this invoice needs to be approved by somebody else, up here in my actions area, I can go ahead and send this approval request and get an approval. And I have a great YouTube video out on our website that shows this in a lot more detail. I urge you to go look at it. You can email Mark if you need a link for that. Now I don't have approvals turned on, so I can go ahead and post this directly from here and finish the process. And what this will do is it'll bring up the posted invoice, all done for me. It's given me my permanent invoice number, which is a system generated number, and it gives me all my information there. Once I close that back, of course, this is real time. So if I go back to Johnson Cleaning Services, my balance has now been updated, 2873. If I drill in on it and I scroll over here to the right, you can see there's my demo 4567 that I just entered in. So it gives me a tremendous amount of power in order to enter transactions directly from Outlook. And this works great on the sales side. You can do almost quote to cash on the sales side. Issue out a quote, order, confirmation, invoice, and so forth. All right, so enough about Outlook. Extremely powerful tool. You can turn this pane on and off. If you don't want it turned on when you're going through just standard emails, you can turn it off. It's up to you. So I'm going to go back to my Dynamics homepage, and I'm going to go ahead and launch into Business Central. One thing to remember is this is single sign-on. So you can see up here in the right-hand corner, I'm logged in as myself. This is my domain account. So there's no additional login that I need to do from within Business Central. I don't have a separate GP login that I need to keep track of, or an FRX login, or a management reporter login that I need. This is just one single login. And just for those of you that are looking at these company names, Kronos is Fabricam, okay? So at the very top, you can see I'm logged in. I've got a headline up here that has some machine learning. It's going to look at some details that have been posted in the last week, month, quarter, and give me some headlines in terms of sales numbers and purchase numbers. The one thing to note about this homepage, it's called your role center, and every user chooses a role underneath their settings. And this role does not necessarily change security. It just changes the navigation and all of the notifications and tiles that pop up. So I can see right here, my role is business manager, which is kind of an overarching role across multiple modules, but I could change that to be very pinpointed to a sales order processor or a purchasing agent or someone who's in sales and marketing or sales and relationship management or an accountant. And what would happen is when I went back to my role center, the navigation at the top would change to be more fixated on my role and what functions I do, as well as my custom actions and all of my activities and tiles. So if I go up here to the top, I can see I have very kind of overarching windows under these series, and the series are very similar to like Dynamics GP, where you have a sales series, a purchasing series, an inventory series. You have the same sort of things up here, and you have all the windows that are common underneath. Also on this Role Center homepage, I have some reminders and statistics. These are called activities within Business Central. If you look back in Dynamics GP, the Dynamics GP homepage, these are very similar to the reminders that are custom out of the box and the ones that you can configure with SmartList when you set up a SmartList favorite. Okay, so just like on your homepage in GP, you have these different activities and tiles in Business Central. So you can see overdue purchase invoice, overdue sales invoice. Those were literally one-to-one with the window I just showed you in GP. And there are many others that you can personalize and add to your Role Center homepage. Anyone that's had Windows 8 or a Windows Phone or anything in the last 6 years understands what these tiles are. These are, Microsoft has been very big on these tiles. These are really counts of open documents. So you can see how many ongoing quotes do we have, sales orders, invoices, how many purchase orders, if I have anything pending approval. Business Central is very high on workflow and approval. Some of the batch functionality in GP is put into workflow functionality in BC. So requests to approve are a very large topic in Business Central. I also have some insights. I can hook this up to Power BI. It's all included in my license and create different Power BI visuals and so forth. And then I can flag some favorite GL accounts. So I can see some account balances directly on my Role Center homepage and see a high-level trial balance. In this case, it's kind of a gross margin statement here. But a lot of the same kind of areas that are on the GP components are now in the Business Central Role Center area, with the addition of Power BI, which is a cloud product like Business Central. So you have nice Power BI reports and visuals that you can tether to master records and your homepage. So probably the biggest difference between GP navigation and Business Central navigation, especially if you're not using the web client in GP, is this contextual search. Every client that I have trained really uses this contextual search for navigation almost 90% of the time. And you're going to quickly see why. If I type something generic such as vendor in this contextual search, this breaks out everything related to vendors in Business Central. And it breaks it out by pages. So I can see the vendor card, I can see vendor bills, I can see all of the vendor related pages. Any reports that are vendor specific. So if I look under reports and analysis, I can see vendor labels, 1099, trial balance, all sorts of vendor driven reports. And then most importantly is online documentation. Dynamics GP has had some documentation issues in terms of keeping them up to date over the last 4 to 5 years. The documentation that's in Business Central is all web-based, and there's a large community of consultants, Microsoft employees, MVPs that are updating this documentation constantly. So you can see down here at the bottom, there's all sorts of topics that relate to vendors, how to set up vendors for automatic payment suggestions, how to set up vendors for email remittance, electronic payments, all sorts of things that take you out to documentation that's on the web, and I'll show you what this looks like. And it's all underneath the Dynamics 365 Microsoft Docs hub. So here's a huge article right here on setting up vendors for remittance, all of the steps to do so. If you look over here on the left, you have all sorts of functionality by region that you can add and look at for different areas of the system. So if I'm looking at purchasing, I can see all the different areas of purchasing, inventory, and so forth. And this is free whether you're a BC licensed customer or not. You can go out and look at this content. Up at the very top, I jumped into general navigation here. If I go to my settings, I have some notifications that I can set. So I have a bunch of notifications and filters related to different business events, such as if I have a stock out on inventory, or I have a fixed asset that hasn't been capitalized for the month, or I have a vendor that's over there that has too many overdue invoices. I can make sure that I get reminders and I get notifications on my homepage. And this is where I control all of those notifications for myself. All right. So one last thing that I want to show you for those GP users who really like the series-based navigation. So like if I click on my purchasing button, I get everything related to purchasing kind of broken out by area. If you're one of these users that likes to have everything in front of them like this, Business Central has if you look at this kind of stacked three lines stacked on top of each other, this will go ahead and take you into navigation that is very similar to what you see in Dynamics GP, broken out by series. And this is still role tailored based on the role that you selected for yourself. Now, what's also nice is if I want to explore everything that I have access to independent of my role, you can see my role is right up here at the top, I can click Explore All, and now I can see everything in a kind of nested fashion like I do in Dynamics GP when I'm trying to find a transaction window or some specific card for, bank account setup or so forth. All right. And again, all of this can be personalized. You can add fields, drop fields from the windows and so forth. All right, so very quickly, that was really the navigation overview. I want to take you through some of the page types. And what I'm going to start with is what's called a list page type, okay? And I'm going to look at a vendor list page type. So if I look at this list, I can see a list of all of my vendors, and I know list has some presumptions when you're talking about Dynamics GP. We always think smart list because it's so functional and people use it a lot. Well, these lists are very similar to smart lists. So what I can do is I can set up filters on these lists by clicking on my filter button, and I can add filters over here to the left. And these are just like hyperlinks within Smart List. So I can look at, for this vendor AR-Day Property Management, I can not only see the vendor list, but I can drill into the balance right here and see the open documents list. These are all the aging documents for this vendor. And you can see when I did that and jumped in, it looks a lot like a smart list where the transaction type is open and the vendor number is 20,000. This vendor ledgers list is extremely similar. In fact, it's almost exactly your purchasing transaction smart list within Dynamics GP. So if I spend a lot of my day right here in payables transactions, where I'm looking at open invoices and so forth, and I have one set up for open, it's very similar to this list, where you're looking at specific open transactions. And if I want to look across all vendors, all I have to do is take that vendor number out. Now I'm looking at my entire vendor ledger entry. This is my whole aging if I ran it today. So list pages, extremely powerful. They give you the query capabilities that GP does. Obviously, I have the exact same thing that I do in Smart List. I can open this up in Excel. I can export it out. So if I want to do some further analysis in Excel, I'll show you what this looks like. I can open that up and see that whole list in Excel and do analysis there. Just like in SmartList, I can also personalize this, and I can add additional fields to my SmartList over here with a huge bank of fields that are involved in this data set. Very similar to SmartList. So I can drag and drop fields or take fields away, and that will save for my user every time I use this window. All right, let me jump back here. I'm going to jump into chart of accounts really quick, which is another list. I showed you the Outlook integration, but one thing that we always get requests on the Dynamics GP side is, hey, I want to update some descriptions or some names of customers, or I need to realign my salespeople. Can you build me an integration or a job that I can that you can update that information for? Well, in Business Central, because Excel is connected, you can actually do that yourself in Excel. So many of these lists will have an edit in Excel function. And again, this is our chart of accounts. So I can see I made a spelling error here on sales inventory, and I may have a number of other descriptions that I want to update. What I can do is I can edit this in Excel. This will open up a local Excel file. And I'm just going to pull it over right when it opens up here. So this opens up a local Excel file, and you can see over here on the right, it went ahead, it knew who I was because Excel has your same login, that single sign-on again, and it authenticates you, and now it pulls down basically that same data set that you're looking at in your account list, and now I can go ahead in and I can make my edits, and I'll just put something big here so you can see the difference. I can make modifications, I can change debit credit balances, I can nest these in different subgroups. I can do all this work in Excel, come right over here to the pane, and I can publish those results back to Business Central and close my Excel sheet. And now, if I just refresh my list here, you can see that took it from Excel. There's my sales inventory demo. I could have done that with a number of accounts, but allows me to change master record information extremely easily using that edit in Excel plugin. This is very helpful for customer pricing as well. When your pricing is very large and you do like price books or price lists within Dynamics GP, this is extremely helpful for that because you can do all of the grunt work in Excel and upload it back in. Okay, so those are list pages. Remember, the big thing is these are like smart lists that are activated for write back and also have hyperlinks in them to jump to different areas. Extremely powerful. I can also save these views like I can my smart list favorites as well. So those are list pages. Another page is what's called a card page, and a card page is just like what you would think it is in Dynamics GP. So if I'm looking at my my cards here for vendors, and this is my vendor list, when I click into one of my vendors, and I'll just do property management here, this is my vendor card in Business Central. And the organization of the data is by what are called these fast tabs. So you can see I have a general fast tab that I can suppress, some address and contact information, invoicing, all sorts of stuff that I can suppress and explode into the amount of detail that I want. But this is basically everything that's going to show on the vendor card, and the vendor address information and EFT information, receivings information is all up here along the top. So if I go and let's go back to my Aaron example, I'm going to jump down to, and I'm just sifting through my vendors till I get to services electronic. So if I go here and I look at vendor, or I look at navigate, and I want to see the contacts under this vendor, when I open that up, I can see there's two contacts. And one of them was the one that I just entered a few moments ago from Outlook. Okay, it came in with some basic default information. You remember I didn't have to enter much. It grabbed the email from the email that Aaron sent me. So all of these contacts are set up as persons that are associated with company contacts. So if you have people that leave your vendors, go to different vendors, you know, you've got some flexibility to shift them around if you want to. What's really nice about BC is everything is centered off of the vendor card that is vendor related. So if I want to look at bank accounts, you know, I can look at bank accounts for vendors and see all of their banks that are configured for EFT, let's say. If I have different document layouts like remittance types that need to go to this vendor and it needs to look different than this other vendor, I can do that. Maybe I have some government contracts or something where I need some additional verbiage when I pay. Maybe I need to note a fund or something like that. I can have a document layout, which is like a modified report in GP, and I can specifically tie it to this vendor and this vendor only. And of course, I have all the information that I do in GP in terms of 1099s. I can put the federal ID number. Are they a legal entity? What's the IRS code? Are they non-employee compensation? So forth. You know, all of the stuff that you guys utilize in Dynamics GP, payment terms and so forth. So everything that I'm showing you here is very similar to on the customer side. Okay. Customer is very similar. Vendor card, customer card, they look very similar. They act very similar. Workflow can be turned on. You notice this request approval probably jumped out at you. If I update anything on the vendor card, I can turn on workflow so that an AP manager has to approve that vendor update, whether it's a tax ID change, or maybe I change their posting group, which is kind of like their class. You know, those things will change. Those things will trigger the approval steps to go through. One other thing that a lot of people utilize in GP, which is nice, is setting up specific purchases accounts for your vendors. So in Business Central, it's different and same. We have what's called recurring purchases lines. So if I'm under this vendor, if I go to recurring purchases lines, what I can do is I can set up profiles. And I'm going to jump back to another vendor where I have one set up and it makes a little more sense. AR Day Property Management here. This is who we rent from. So we've got some rent expense. So if I'm looking at this vendor, I can go to, I can navigate to, oops, excuse me. Where'd I go? Sorry guys, hold on just a second. There we go, purchases. If I go to recurring purchases lines, you can see I have a profile set up here called property rent. And on these different documents, I can say, I'm going to manually enter these accounts, but on the actual invoices, I want it to ask me. And what this looks like here is, if you look at rent, it's just a single GL account that's going to be placed on the line item for rent expense, and it's going to have a department code of admin. Okay, and a department is like a segment of the GL. It's a dimension. So I can set up these different purchases profiles, which indicate which GL accounts come through. Okay, so for this vendor here, I have property rent set up. So if I'm going to set up a new purchase invoice for this vendor, and I'll go ahead and do that, this will take us to our third transaction type. So now I'm looking at a purchase invoice. Looks very similar to the card. Looks very similar to that cleaning invoice that I did from Outlook. So when I place that in here and I type in a vendor invoice number, I'll just put rent 100. Look at what pops up at the very top. Recurring purchases lines exist. Do you want to insert them on the document? So I can now say get recurring lines. I can bring that in. If I had multiple ones selected and I wanted to, or multiple ones assigned to the vendor and I wanted to select them, I could do that here. I'm going to select rent, and it's going to go ahead and put that down here for me on the bottom. So I know a lot of you use already mapped purchases accounts on your vendors. If we go into GP here and we look at a vendor, and we look at vendor accounts, a lot of us use the purchases account, or we may build a group of accounts that default on the transaction whenever I enter an invoice for this vendor. Well, it's the exact same concept. The only thing that's nicer is you can now share those profiles against vendors. So I had a rent profile that had those accounts, and those showed up right here. So this is a purchasing invoice transaction. Down below, I already posted one of these for you, and I showed you one of these, so I don't want to go through this, go through the posting process again. But one thing that is notable, if you guys use expense and revenue deferrals, is you notice this deferral code pops in right here. So if we've got an amount down here, let's say we're prepaying rent for the entire year. Let's just say it's $32,000. Well, this deferral code can either default or be selected, and just like in Dynamics GP, if I'm going to, give me 1 second here to find this. If I want to look at the schedule, I can go ahead right into the deferral schedule, and because that defaulted in, it's going to be straight line 12 months. It knows what the balance sheet account is. I'll expand this a little bit. It knows what the balance sheet account is based on the deferral template, and I can post this out for the entire year if I want to, just like I could in Dynamics GP using expense deferrals. So very, very similar functionality. I think I'm at about the 7-minute mark, right? Right, Mark?
That is correct.
Okay. Moving right along then, I'm going to go into some cash management. So just a quick recap. We looked at our Roll Center homepage, which everybody has a Roll Center homepage. We looked at a vendor list, a vendor ledger entries list, and then we've looked at a payables invoice twice. One thing I want to circle back to that I led off with is, Business Central as a SaaS solution has a lot of flexibility in terms of API. And by API, I mean cloud services can talk to cloud services. And when you go to the cloud with your ERP system, you really gain the benefits of utilizing direct connection to your bank. So when you set up a bank account in Business Central, you immediately link that bank account utilizing what's called a Yodlee web service. And what that does is you link that bank account using your online banking login. And once that's linked together, you can now use that as the basis of your reconciliation every single month. Or if you want to reconcile on a weekly basis, that's okay too. Or a daily if you're retail. So this gives you the ability to build your reconciliation transactions, or your statements is what they're called in Business Central, directly from that Yodlee web service. And this is very similar to eReconcile in Dynamics GP. The difference is I don't have to request a file from the bank, put it in a specific location on my server, run the import, build the reconciliation. I just go ahead and run directly from Business Central my statement, give it my dates, and it builds the reconciliation for me. So those type of APIs are already pre-built into Business Central and ready to go as long as you've got a username and login and a bank in the US. In addition to that, you've got SafePay that is configured out of the box. EFT has the Nacha PPD and CCD formats ready out of the box. So if you want to use EFT for payables, or you wanted to use EFT for payables for a long time in Dynamics GP, it's much simpler in Business Central to light that up and start transmitting to the bank. I got 2 more items here that I want to show you really quick, and they're both related to banks, or one is related to banks, I should say. One thing, working with GP for the last 15 years, and speaking of banks and credit cards, one request that always comes from GP folks is, how do I get my credit card expenses into GP, and how do I get them posted and make sure they make sense and they can be auditable? You know, one thing that Business Central does really good with this Yodlee service is it allows you to bring those transactions into Business Central in what's called a payment reconciliation journal. And I'm going to pull up a different Business Central tenant here because I don't have any demo data on this in the one I was showing you. But this payment reconciliation journal, what it does is it reaches out to your bank and pulls down transactions. And these are transactions that ideally do not exist in GP. So what you do is you source those transactions, and the reason it's called a payment reconciliation journal is because payment equals cash, right? So this is cash that was sourced somewhere else, but you're going to bring in code and it's automatically reconciled because you pulled it from the source. And this uses some AI and machine learning. So if I look at this list of transactions that I pulled into my payment reconciliation journal, I can see that there are about 6 of them in here, and it's given me a match confidence. It's looking at some of the transaction text that came from the bank service. This is what would show up on your statement. And it's tried to map that to invoice numbers that are within the system, customers, vendors, depending on what direction the cash is moving, and it will create those payments for you. Now, this is great for credit cards. This is also really good for a lot of clients that use online bill pay for specific insurances and so forth. If you use online bill pay, what do you have to do right after you do the online bill pay in GP? You got to come right back in and do a manual payment in GP, then that goes into bank rec, and then you've got to reconcile the two at the end of the accounting period, right? Think of that scenario, you did it all in one step. So you do you go ahead and do the online bill pay on your website, on your bank website. You pull it into your payment reconciliation journal. It'll try to match based on confidence here what open invoices are for that amount and contain that number, and it'll recommend it for you. You can always change, of course. But if you look at this, if I apply manually here, you can see this one right here that has medium confidence was for 2214. And you can see the invoice that it applied it to right over here. And the application amount was 2214, and the account name was First Step Consultants. So really cool leveraging of cloud-to-cloud API to help with cash management. You know, making sure that we can recon our accounts quickly in the accounting cycle, and even giving you the ability to recon those accounts on smaller intervals. If you want to recon daily, great way to do it. You want to recon weekly, great way to do it. Just all depends on what your business process is and if you've got any delays in your account, in your cash transactions, and so forth. My goal was to crash course through this and talk as fast as I could to give you as much information as I possibly could. The one thing I didn't do was a general journal, but I want to make sure we have enough time for questions at the end, and we've got 5 minutes here. So, Mark, do we have any questions that?
There's no questions there, but I want to open it up for any, I want to take everybody off mute and open it up for any questions that people want to ask directly. If you want, can you show that in like 2 minutes or less?
Yeah, why don't we save the general journal for the end, and anyone who wants to see it can, and I'll show it at the end. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense. So, okay. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone so that everybody can ask a question if they need. I'm surprised in the question box, especially knowing some of the people that are in attendance here, that we don't have more questions or any questions actually in the question box. So with that said, everybody's unmuted. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Don't be shy.
Hi, it's Brian Shields here with iSmile Dental Products. I've got a quick question for Chris about purchasing and inventory management in terms of purchasing recommendations. Is the Business Essentials different in any way in terms of the recommended purchasing parameters being able to set up and how it calculates needed inventory?
Very different. Yeah, you've got a worksheet. You have a couple of different areas in terms of planning, but you have a lot more tools at your disposal. You have things such as variants and SKUs that are further breakdowns of items. So like in your case, in dental products, you know, you may have a set of masks or a set of gloves that come in different colors, different sizes. These variants now are those different types of sizes and so forth. And you can do, you can then stock and put reorder levels and reorder points on those different variants of the items. So gives you a lot more flexibility, and also in terms of replenishment method. So purchasing is obviously one replenishment method, just a purchase order in a standard supply chain. Manufacturing, light manufacturing, kitting, as well as transferring from another site is also a replenishment method. So each item and each variant can have those different replenishment methods at different site locations in order to, you know, best optimize the inventory that's on hand.
Would it allow us to take advantage of, and right now in GP, it's basically a min-max type of purchasing. Would it allow any kind of economic order quantity purchasing logic to take into account different purchasing levels? Vendor discounts if you purchase more, or future sale discounts from a vendor. You could look at increasing quantity or items like that.
Yes, you have a forecasting tool that also is taken into account in terms of procurement. So you can forecast out units of sales for the year, and it can take out those, it can utilize those forecasted numbers in order to build the demand and thus execute it with the procurement. So if you know for a particular SKU, you want to make sure that you're going to have demand of 250 in January and then 7,000 in July. And those are really the only two times where you're going to have demand for those items. Well, the forecasting tool allows you to build it out so that it takes that demand into account, not just typical min-maxes. Does that make sense?
No, what I'm talking about, Chris, is let's say the vendor has a quantity discount at 10 units, and normally I would only need to buy 8 units for it. Would it be able to come back and say to me, hey, you know, if you buy 10 units, you'll get a cheaper price?
Potentially, because you do have vendor pricing that's a lot more elaborate than Dynamics GP. But I'll follow up with you directly on that, Brian, on in terms of during the procurement process, does it take advantage of special pricing?
Got it.
Yeah, I'll follow up with you directly on that.
All right, great questions, Brian. Anyone else? Any other questions out there? All right.
Okay.
Chris, did you want to show the journal entry real quick?
Sure.
Into a field of the questions.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is really just the general entry window within Business Central. I'm trying to keep these topics that are in this demo very high level, keep them to AP, cash, and general ledger entries. Oh, and I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go back to my original. So I'm going to go to general journals here. And the batch concept that you have in Dynamics GP, it still exists in Business Central, particularly in journals. I think when you start talking about documents such as purchase invoices, sales orders, documents like that are more workflow controlled as opposed to batch controlled, is probably the best way to put it. And journals, much like I'm going to show you right now, are more batch controlled. So I have a batch here just called test, very simple. And it's a much more kind of linear looking journal entry here. So the one thing that's really nice that I know a lot of people do is they'll have their journal entries already set up at month end for their adjustments and their reclasses and so forth. So what's really nice is you can copy and paste directly from Excel and go directly into Business Central, and it will take that data and create those journal entry lines for you. So just like you could do in Dynamics GP, you can do the same thing in here. You also have the ability to do standard journals. which are journal templates in Dynamics GP, or what are commonly referred to as quick journals. So you have quick journals as well. The one thing that I wanted to call out in here is the difference between what Dynamics GP calls an account and what Business Central calls an account. In the Business Central world, your account is really your natural or your main segment, okay? So miscellaneous expense, utilities expense, and so forth. Now, the way that Business Central works is it's a dimensional system. So you set up dimensions that pertain to your business, and those dimensions take the place of your segments in Dynamics GP. So in Business Central, you can see I've got my account number right here, and then I have a department code right here. Well, department is typically a segment that almost all of our clients have. Everybody has different departments. So this gives you the ability to define what those department codes are, such as administration, sales, and so forth. And you can set up defaults based on vendors, customers, items on when department codes default into transactions and when they need to be selected on transactions. You know, in the GP world, if you're looking at an account, you know, you've really got multiple segments of the account. And in this scenario of Fabricam, I believe the first segment is division and the third segment is department, and then the middle segment is the natural. So if you were going to mimic this exactly in Business Central, you would have your account be 1100, and then you would have two dimensions for one for division and one for department. And any of you who have implemented analytical accounting in Dynamics GP know how dimensions work. The key difference between analytical accounting in GP and dimensions in Business Central is dimensions are ingrained in everything. They are everywhere, and they're just as important as the account. So it doesn't feel like an after the fact sort of add-on to a transaction, a lot like analytical does in some instances. Okay, it's ingrained in every single transaction. You can tie them to customers, vendors, items, so forth. You can make requirements. When I hit this account, I have to track this dimension. You know, you can set it up to be very elaborate. And lastly, the important thing is you have a unlimited number of dimensions that you can track. Okay, so this really helps you keep your chart of accounts down. Now, a lot of these dimensions that you see here, you might never use on a financial statement. So to set them up as a segment in your GL would be overkill and would make your GL larger than it needs to be. In Business Central, that's not the case. You can set up a very small dimension with a couple of values. Maybe you're only going to have 10, 12 transactions throughout the year that you need to track on this dimension. Maybe it's for a specific government grant or a fund that comes through, and you need to track your expenses and make it auditable. Well, that's a very easy thing to do in Business Central because the dimensions are so flexible and they're ingrained across the system.
All right, perfect. Chris, we certainly appreciate it. I'm going to change presenters here real quick and just kind of close up. Went a few minutes over, but we certainly do appreciate those that could to hang out with us. Again, I want to remind everybody that we're doing these webinars on a monthly basis. So we'll be getting invitations out for next month's webinar. I believe we're going to be having Green Shades come in since it's getting towards the end of the year to talk to us about some of their solutions as add-ons to Dynamics GP. Are there any other questions that exist out there at this point? And if not, then I will close out and say thank you very much. Just know that we'll be sending a recording out of this session. If you have any additional questions, follow up with your account manager, whether that's me, whether that's Chris, Susan, whomever. And you'll also be getting a survey on today's webinar. We ask that you fill that out. And for everybody that attended today and also completes the survey, we're going to be doing a random drawing and giving away an Amazon gift card worth $50. So please take that little bit of extra time to fill in the survey for us and give us some feedback that we can use to plan future web sessions. With that, thank you again for your time. Have an amazing day and hope to talk to all of you soon. Take care.